Well, welcome to another one of our opportunities that we have when we gather together to get a chance to basically ask questions about crystal healing, how we begin to learn how to not only start the conversation related to crystal healing, but how can we grow with it and bring it into our lifestyle and our life choices and our self-care practices. So I'm really grateful that you are either tuning in live at this time or watching the replay at some other time. For those of you who are new to me, my name is Mary Jo Feely. I am the owner of Fourth Dimension Healing in Stillwater, Minnesota. And through my healing practice, I offer energy healing and crystal healing sessions. I offer mentoring and I offer classes. I also am the director of the Center for Crystal and Healing Studies, which is my online school. And through my school, I have a variety of courses that are blended. And, my online school really rolled out when we were all essentially told to pause during COVID. And I realized that while we had many children and youth throughout the world learning distantly, that it gave me an opportunity to be able to rethink how I could make my classes available to people throughout the geographies where we live, and to also be able to recognize that in our busy life, especially as adult learners, we like to be able to have some sense that we can work on coursework at our own pace. My courses are blended in that there is certainly content that you work through, whether it is lectures, videos, meditations, downloadable content, and you do that at your own pace. And then we also have touch points at various times throughout the courses where we meet individually for mentoring, either in person or virtually, depending on what works. So I've been asked a lot about what are my crystal classes like, and I will bring that question back around at the end of our time together, because I do think it's helpful that when we are exploring crystal healing, that we do the work to learn about the rocks and the crystals that we are curious about, their properties, whether it is their geological properties, their mineralogical properties, as well as their metaphysical healing properties. So I like to kind of look at crystal healing quite holistically, and I hope that you'll be able to hear that as we move through the questions that have come forth for this time. It's been a couple months since we've been together, and so I have had some questions come in that are actually pretty interesting. There were a couple things that I wanted to kind of circle back around from the last time that we chatted, which was in May. And one of the things before I do that is I have the chat window open. And so if you are joining the live stream live, you can go ahead and ask questions and I will answer your questions to the best of my ability. The live stream chat is not public once I make the actual live stream video public. It's currently unlisted, and the only way that it can be accessed is through the links. And I do that just to kind of hold this space a little bit more closely. So I wanted to tell you about that. The other thing I want to reference is that if you are watching live, you will notice that you have in the chat window some of the links that take you directly to my website, to my podcast. I have a podcast called Ask, Learn, Heal, and I do offer podcasts on energy healing, crystal healing, and self-care. And all of my podcasts have guided meditations. And so if you are really feeling interested and drawn into crystal healing, you may find that some of those podcasts where I talk about crystal healing could be really helpful for you as you are learning this particular modality. The other thing that you may notice on my actual YouTube channel is that there is a podcast page, and YouTube recently added that as an option. You will find some of my podcasts there, but if you want to find all of them, go ahead and check out my Ask, Learn, Heal podcast. So there are two questions that are follow-up from the last time we talked. And the first one, it has to do with when I was talking about working perhaps with a couple stones at the same time. And the question is, what do you mean by the mass of a stone? Is it the same as the size? That's a good question, and thank you for asking. And if you ever have clarifying questions, please let me know. Send me a chat through my website. Go ahead and send me an email, and I'll make sure I circle back to that question on the next live Q&A. Okay. So the question basically was, is being asked out of a conversation that we were having related to working with two stones at the same time. And I'm going to go ahead and just grab a couple stones that I have set up for one of the questions. And you're going to notice, a little slippery, you're going to notice that there are two different sizes and they weigh different amounts. So there's more of a density and more of a mass, an actual weight to this stone compared to this stone. So when working with stones intentionally together, perhaps one in one hand and one in the other, and this question, I believe, came from the conversation we had related to working with shungite. Shungite in your left hand and another stone in your right hand. Having those roughly the same mass, the same size and weight can be really helpful. So I hope that that helps clarify that question. And if not, you know how to reach back out to me. The other question that came in said, in your last video, you talked about shungite being friable. Can you explain what you mean? It's interesting. I've been asking around, and I apologize for using a word that may have been unfamiliar. It's a word that perhaps being a nurse and in healthcare for many decades, that's perhaps a word that is just simply offered through the healthcare lexicon, so to speak. But what friable means is it's more likely to be brittle, it's fragile, it's likely to fall into little pieces more readily and break off. And so the question was asked regarding elite shungite and how to work with it. And I always, when I'm talking about elite shungite, we want to recognize it's a very, very light and fragile and easily broken, brittle stone. And that means it's friable. It can definitely be worked with, but it can also fall apart. And even my elite shungite, as careful as I am, sometimes little pieces will fall off. And I just collect those together and keep those in a little area so that I still have some of that shungite all gathered together. It's just simply not in a whole piece any longer. So again, great questions. For clarity, please make sure you let me know if there's something I say that doesn't make sense. Okay? Just want to check the chat. So this first question, I'm smiling because it's the sort of question that I could easily ask of someone else. And so I think that it's a really great way to kind of kick off this crystal conversation. How do you use crystals, they ask. What does a typical day look for you? So I always want to know, how is it that the people that I'm learning from, my mentors, my guides, those that I find to be very helpful on my own spiritual and healing journey, I'm always curious about how do they integrate and work with these sorts of things. And so I thought I would bring as examples some of the various types of gemstones and crystals that I work with. And I hope you'll get a sense that through all of it, regardless of whether I'm wearing them as bracelets or working with them in meditation or have them someplace in or around my workspace, that I hope you recognize that the thread running through all of it is intention. And I've talked about that before. We can have crystals and gemstones around us that we kind of ignore and don't even think about it. And we are benefiting from their properties, but not fully, because there is this reciprocity and this relationship that we develop with the gemstones and crystals. And my sense through working with these stones, not because I read it in a book or somebody told me about this, but my sense when I'm working with these stones is that each stone has, in a sense, its own spirit, its own spark of divine light, even though it looks way different than most of the life that I see beaming around me, whether it is a garden full of tomatoes or a kitten or a mosquito or a human being. We have all of these wonderful ways that we see life reflected back to us. And my sense through my experience is that there is that life being reflected back through the gemstones and crystals as well, through the mineral kingdom. Okay. So some of the stones that I decided to bring to show you today, these are all stones that I personally work with. These are not in my healing office. They are not worked with clients or students. These are the ones that I work with intentionally. And if you've followed some of my work, and if not, I encourage you to check out some of the other videos that I offer. I also always am working with the system of elements of earth, fire, water, wind, and storm. And because I work so interconnectedly with the gemstones and the elements, and how those elements impact and influence and affect our own physical experience, I can't separate those apart. So I take that into the equation too as I'm working with stones. So if we think about physically, that's predominantly going to be earth kind of energy. And sometimes we just need a boost energetically. And so when I'm feeling depleted, and it happens to me, just like it happens to you, when I'm either not sleeping well or feeling super rushed, doing a lot of things, not eating as well, maybe not getting my exercise routine in as regularly as I'd like, those all impact the physical body. And a reminder for me and to intentionally work with an earth stone, particularly one that's really connected with vital energy, is really effective. And that stone today that I want to show you is ruby. So ruby is corundum. It has a hardness of 9 on the Mohs hardness scale. And the Mohs hardness scale goes from 1 to 10. 10 is diamond, and it's way up here. And then we have talc at the beginning, all the way up through ruby, which is 9. And actually, what's so interesting about the Mohs hardness scale is that there is a greater distance between ruby at a 9 and up to 10 as there is the entire rest of the way, getting from talc all the way to the corundum. When corundum is red, it's ruby. When it's any other color, it's referred to and known as sapphire. So that's just a little kind of geeky mineral talk that will help you tuck that into your brain space and be able to grow with that information. So I like to work with ruby, and by working with ruby, I may find that I am putting it in a little pouch and attaching it perhaps to a belt loop, or slipping the little strings of the pouch through my actual belt. It could be that I've been tossing and turning a lot at night. And so what I really want to do is get settled into my body so that I can rest. I may actually put this inside my pillowcase. So earth stones can be really effective when we are sleeping. Okay. So that is one that I work with. Another one that you may have heard me talk about before is charoite. Charoite is this phenomenal stone that supports the heart chakra. It drops that deep spiritual understanding and wisdom down into the heart so that we can filter that through our experience into our consciousness. It is a wind element stone, so it really does work up high in these upper chakras. yet it emanates, in my experience, through the whole energy field. It's very soothing. It's very gentle. It's very, it's not a soft energy. It is, for me, in my experience, it's more of a kind of a gathering and a secure kind of encircling, embracing energy. So this is a lovely stone that I work with a lot. I have several different kinds of charoite that I work with throughout the day. And this is an example of one of the pieces, a tumbled piece. And you can see it's not very big. You know, sometimes I was just talking about kind of getting settled in the body, and sometimes life gets kind of busy. And so to anchor that busyness and that sense of, wow, I have a lot of things to do. I have lots of ideas and I have a lot of action kind of energy moving through me. To anchor that, I find rhodonite is really helpful. So I often will hold rhodonite as I do some meditations. So if you really have not yet had the opportunity to explore crystal healing meditations, I would really encourage you to take a look at my podcast, because you will have an opportunity to experience a number of different types of ways to work with a guided meditation and various types of crystals and gemstones. It can be really, really powerful. And that, perhaps as you do work with some of the different stones you have, you will also be able to identify which are the ones that you work with on a regular basis. Because I work with the 5 elements, my gemstones are sorted and set apart by element. So if I'm sensing that I need some support physically, then the first thing I do is I discern which element would help me most with that. And then from there, I will go to that particular collection of stones and crystals that I have that are part of that particular element. And then I will work on discerning how to do that. And if you're curious about how that goes even deeper, you can always ask a question. Perhaps next month we can explore that. If you really want to do some intentional work around learning how to discern which stones will be helpful, that perhaps would be a really good idea for you to contact me. I do offer mentoring sessions, and we could easily cover that in a mentoring session that could be really, really supportive for you. Okay. So working with the rhodonite helps take this kind of action energy and anchor it. And the other thing I would say with the rhodonite, I'm using the rhodonite more now during spring and summer, because we are really in the middle of some really active, energetic seasonal time in the Northern Hemisphere. If you're in the Southern Hemisphere, you will find that you perhaps would be working with stones such as fiery stones, like the rhodonite is, more in the off season for us. This is a precious piece of quartz that I was given as a gift. It's very precious to me, and it reminds me of the kindness that it was offered with. And so I'm very, very fond of this particular piece of quartz, and I work with it almost every day. And the way I work with it is I intentionally work with clear quartz, rock crystal, silicon dioxide. I work with its amplification properties to be able to support the other stones that I'm working with. So if I'm going to work with the charoite and the quartz together, the quartz will amplify the charoite. Now, as I say that, I want to just add one thing. I'm going to go back to these 2 pieces of these 2 stones. I think these were the ones where we were talking about mass. And when we have, when we're working with 2 stones intentionally for balancing purposes, I think it's important to have them roughly the same mass. When it comes to quartz, you don't have to be concerned about that, because you're not balancing, in this case, the charoite with your quartz. You're simply working with this quartz to amp up, to amplify the properties of the charoite. I hope that makes sense. Here is, let me think here. Okay, here is another piece of quartz that we'll be referencing in just a few minutes. But this is going to also ramp up the charoite. So it's not the balancing that we want to have roughly the same size of mass. So this is one of my favorites that I work with almost every day. There's another stone that I work with fairly regularly, and it's selenite. So selenite is gypsum. This has a hardness of 2. So it is way down next to talc when it comes to its softness. So be very careful with this. Don't get this wet. It'll turn to mush, okay? But one of the ways I like working with this particular piece of selenite, it's a selenite wand, and it's fabulous for clearing the energy field. It could be that we're literally just going to kind of comb down our aura or our biofield, that space around us. You may have a different piece of selenite that might be more of a small piece or a sphere or a tower. You may work with that differently. But since the question asks, what does a typical day look like? A typical day for me will often be running this through my energy field to help clear, sometimes to set myself for the day, and certainly towards the end of the day to kind of clear away any of the extra energies I've collected. When it comes to clearing the backside of you, here's another way we can really work intentionally. So yes, I could try and maneuver this and hope I don't drop it and break it, or I can simply set the intention that I'm going to go down the front of my body, and it's going to be clearing the back of my energy field. So simply, here I go, I'm going down the back of my head, the back of my neck, I'm going over my shoulder blades, and now I'm going through my ribs and down my vertebrae. So that's the way that I use it. And then the final 2 stones I brought today to show you the stones like in a typical day is, again, filtering life through the elements. One of the most important elements that I think we can work with is the storm element. And storm means that it's not really an element, we know that, but it's more of a transformational experience that takes place when all the other elements are balanced. So if we've got balanced earth and balanced fire and balanced water and balanced wind, which is up here in that headspace, we have storm. Storm is about transformation. And we all know that if there is a bad storm, things that are not grounded and anchored go flying all over the place. And sometimes those are things we treasure, right? So if we hear a storm's coming through, we sometimes kind of take a look around and see if there's anything that we need to be more intentionally careful about. So when it comes to working with storm element stones, storm helps definitely to kind of clear out some of that kind of unsettled stuff that we don't need, and it helps us remain anchored while we do. And there are 2 stones. One of them that I work with very regularly is a piece of Tibetan quartz. So Tibetan quartz is silicon dioxide, just like this. However, the region of the world where it comes from has a different energetic. And for me, in my experience, I find whenever I'm working with any type of Tibetan quartz, there is a higher connection and a deeper connection with spiritual wisdom, which is a little different than some of the other quartz that I work with. So going back to this piece, I might work with this piece to amp up another stone to be able to really increase the benefits and the properties of the other stone. I don't do that personally with Tibetan quartz. Tibetan quartz, in my experience, in my personal work, is reserved for spiritual meditations and growth in that spiritual part of my well-being. So keep that in mind. That's my take on it. You can definitely do what you'd like. The other stone I love working with quite a bit. This is also a storm element stone. This is a piece of K2. So K2 comes from Pakistan. It is actually comes from the mountain K2, and it has it's a white granite that has azurite. Sometimes you'll even find malachite in it, and it is a very powerful stone for supporting the entire energy field. Not only the chakras, which are the energy centers that run up through our body from our tailbone all the way up through the top of our head, but also it has this ability to help us really have this very strong energy field that essentially comes up out of the top of our head as a north pole, circles around and comes in below our feet if we were to have a south pole and that entry point. So that is why I really like working with K2 because, again, it is storm. My experience is that it is a more of a grounding transformational storm stone, whereas the Tibetan quartz is a higher spirit with storm. So those are some of the stones as an example that I work with pretty regularly. I'm just going to set them aside, and I see a chat. Oh, good. Someone says, this is super helpful. Thank you. You're most welcome. So another way that I work with the stones pretty regularly is through working with crystal grids. And I'm going to bring these over. This process that I'm going to just talk with you about, because this is what I do, is certainly another thing that we could explore individually if that was something you wanted to learn about. I actually have a couple examples of grids. Here, for example, is a hexagon six-sided grid. It has a circle around it as well. And the reason I like working with hexagon grids is because it aligns really beautifully with crystals that have a hexagonal inner structure. That means at its molecular structure, as it's built, stacked upon, each molecule stacking upon the next, it creates a six-sided hexagonal structure. And when I can pair up a stone's geometry with a grid geometry, it's kind of like 2 for 1. It's kind of like BOGO, right? Buy one, get one. So one of the things I like doing with my these particular pieces of quartz is working very intentionally with the elements and creating a grid. And I actually don't use that six-sided grid. I use this piece of quartz that we've been already taking a peek at, and I'm going to set that aside for a minute. Quartz is this wonderful stone that has the ability to be able to be programmed. Now, program simply means that we are setting an intention very deeply, very prayerfully, very intentionally. And for lack of a better way to describe it, it's as if it's kind of getting locked into the crystalline structure of the quartz. And quartz is a beautiful stone to be able to support programming. And programming is different than cleansing and clearing. You can have a piece of quartz and you can clear some of the energetics out of it, but it doesn't take the program away. So what I have done through a process, and I would be happy sometime if you wanted to really learn this would be where, again, you and I would work together to work with this process. I have actually programmed each of these pieces of quartz specifically for each of the 5 elements. So this particular piece of quartz has been programmed to earth. And you'll notice this is not super crystal clear, unlike this one, right? You do not have to have a piece of quartz that's crystal water clear. You may want one, and that's fine, but that is not necessary. So this particular piece of quartz has been created, or not created, programmed to the earth element. And there's a process that I worked with for that. This one has been programmed. Another word maybe would be attuned, but I like the word programmed. Basically, I have really worked through a process to be able to get this stone to hold the energy, the frequency, the resonance of fire. This one, oh, got it. I actually have a mark. It's okay to put a piece of tape and mark your stone. This one is water. This one is wind. And then this one is storm. So what I do for my grid is I actually make a 5-pointed, like a pentagram. So I start with earth, and I always go earth, fire, water, wind, storm. So earth, fire, water, wind, storm. So I have the pentagram, the 5. I'm just turning my labels down so I don't have to look at words. Then I take this 6th one, and because it has this beautiful flat base, that creates a grid that is going to not only radiate out these elements, also radiate them up. And whenever you create a grid, and like I will have to reset this grid when I put it back where it typically is, then it will, over the course of about 24 hours, really begin to resonate and connect those energies really beautifully. So anyway, that is another way that I work with stones pretty regularly. So I hope you're able to see that there are some tumbled stones that I might carry. There are things like selenite I'll use to clear my energy field. There are definitely stones that I will work with for meditation purposes. Always going back to the intention. What is the intention? Is the intention to get more clarity about why my feet are so sore all the time? Or is the intention about why am I so frustrated when I have to go and stand in line at any number of the stores? You know, these are all ways life shows us and reflects back to us areas that we can do some healing work related to whatever's arising. And knowing the elements and knowing your rocks is really a great way to do that. One of the things that you may or may not be aware of is that on my YouTube channel, I have what's called Rock Talk. They're Rock Talk videos. They're roughly around 5 minutes. Sometimes they get a little chatty and they get a little bit closer to 7 or 8 minutes. But I'm basically just giving you kind of like a real quick snapshot of what a stone is, what are its properties, what is its chemical and mineralogical structure, what is its hardness, how is it that we can use it to support healing? So take a look. I've got several, and I always roll another one out every couple of weeks or so. So you might find something there too. Okay. Just checking chat. Good. All right. I know this is a lot of information, and isn't it beautiful that you can go back and watch the replay and you can just keep going back? And one of the things I like to do is kind of set the sections and tell you where the timestamps are so you can just jump to the section that you want. All right, so this is a really great question. And some of these questions you can see are being asked by people who have been doing some work with crystal healing, and they're beginning to step in a little bit deeper. So this question said, I've heard you refer to a body clock, but I'm not clear on the details. Can you talk about it and give some examples of how to use gemstones with the clock? So the clock that this person is referencing, if you were to come and see me for a healing session, you will very likely have one or more areas identified that need some support related to the traditional Chinese medicine organ body clock system. Now, I am not a traditional Chinese medicine provider. I have not studied greatly in this area. And so, although I will say that when I'm working with clients who are also working with a traditional TCM provider, or a acupuncturist, it's not surprising that often some of what's coming up for them in the healing session also is the same kind of body and energy work that they've been doing with their uh, Chinese medicine provider as well. Okay. So the organ body clock within the context of the traditional Chinese medicine model takes a look at major organ body function areas throughout a 12 or 24-hour cycle. Each area gets a 2-hour chunk of time. And the organ system or the organ body clock system starts at 3 o'clock in the morning with the lung function area. And lung is from, for example, 3 to 5 a.m. So when we're working with the organ body clock system, what we're doing is we're recognizing what is happening within that function area, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And it can differ quite a bit in comparison to our Western model. One of the easiest ways that I think I can describe the differences is if we were to take a look at the bladder function area. In our Western understanding, we know that the kidneys purify the blood. Whatever is not needed from the kidneys, that is liquid, moves into the bladder and then is passed out of the body as urine. So that's kind of an elimination process for the bladder. In the traditional Chinese medicine approach, it's quite vastly different. The kidneys store vital energy that's called Jing. Some of the Jing we're born with, some of the Jing we can actually continue to replenish through exercise and eating well and taking good care of ourselves. When that vital energy, that Jing from the kidneys leaves the kidneys, it goes into the bladder. And then the bladder in turn disseminates that, sends that out wherever it's needed in the body. So that's quite different than our understanding of the bladder as elimination in the traditional Chinese medicine model. That bladder is about how do we get that life energy where it needs to go. So there are a number of different organ systems. I thought it would be helpful in kind of addressing this question about how we work with gemstones and the organ body clock system is to show you 3 different examples that are fairly easy to work with. And when I'm working with the gemstones as part of supporting an organ function area in the body clock, what we're going to actually end up doing is creating a little bit of a layout of stones in a particular layout in a particular part of the body. For example, I did not bring them with me today, but if we were working with the spleen layout, you would be working with stones that are almost falling off your body, but they're way over here on the side. I wanted to show you 3 that I think are really helpful. And the first one, yes, I'm going to start with this one. This is a heart layout. So if you were to come to see me, then I would actually show you this card. If you were having a distance session, maybe you're in another part of the country, or maybe you're one of my overseas clients, then I would send this to you electronically. But there's always a little image of a person, and it shows where you would place the stones. And then there's always some information on the back about that particular function area, as well as some of the various gemstones that can be worked with really effectively in this area. So this particular body function area is really active from 11 a.m. to 1 in the afternoon, okay? And what we do is we lay 4 stones, 1 here, 1 on each side a little bit lower, and then right in the center is the 4th stone. There are a variety of stones that you can work with. In my online shop, I actually have collections of all of the different organ body clock systems, so you could see those. And what I offer through my online shop, because I do want to try and make sure that the sets and collections that I offer are realistically affordable, because there are some stones that would be fabulous, but they're really a little bit pricey. So I want to be economically mindful about that. So the stones that I find really nice to work with is a piece of rose quartz. Rose quartz is one of the quartz family, but it's very nurturing of compassion and self-love and self-nurturing. And a lot of times when we are working with heart issues, it could be grief, it could be loss, it could be a sense of sadness because of some transition that you're going through. Supporting that heart can be really nice, and rose quartz is one that's worked with. And then 3 pieces of green aventurine, and green aventurine is a form of quartz as well. And it, again, is placed here, and then the rose quartz beneath it, and then to each side, the other pieces of green aventurine. And when I'm working with clients, and if you were to, maybe you have some of these stones at home and you want to work with this, I would say I typically will take like a washcloth or a dishcloth or some kind of fabric and lay that on, place the stones, and then kind of fold that cloth over the stones, and then things stay in place pretty well. If you're ever working with a stone with any kind of a layout, and maybe you decide you're going to lay down for a few minutes and maybe rest and meditate, or just listen to some nice music for maybe 10 or 15 or 20 minutes. When you are done, if you notice some of the stones have rolled off your body, don't worry about it. That's almost as if the stone knew it was done, and it can just shift away. Okay? So that is the heart layout, and I think that's a really lovely one. The next layout function area is the kidneys. And hands down, in my healing practice, this is the layout more than any other layout that people seem to really need. And it's because I think our world is pretty crazy right now, and we are stressed, and we are sometimes almost running on empty, and we kind of get depleted. And this is where the vital energy of the kidneys could use a little boost. I'll show you the little card. And you can see these are going to be, the image almost makes it look like it's your lower body, but it's not. It's going to be roughly around where your belly button is, below your rib cage. If you know the chakras, it's at or slightly above, I would say, your solar plexus chakra, which is the yellow one, if you ever see a picture. So what we're going to do is I would work with tiger's eye, golden tiger's eye, again, a form of quartz, and then 2 pieces of hematite or hematite. Again, perhaps laying a cloth, placing these stones, folding the cloth over the stones so they kind of hold, and allowing yourself to rest. So when I'm working with clients, they may have this type of a layout, and they might have stones in their hand, and they might have stones on or around some of their chakras. So you don't have to worry or be concerned that you should only be using these stones. You'll get a sense as to what stones you are working with. Just recently, I had a client that actually had 2 layouts on top of each other. And I wasn't sure. I thought, whoa, that's a lot of rocks. But they were just fine with that. Okay. So again, right across that midsection. This is a 5 to 7 p.m. time. In fact, we're actually doing this live stream live right now during kidney time. The other one that I like to work with, and this actually comes up quite a bit as well, is the gallbladder layout, working with that gallbladder function area. And this is an 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. time. The gallbladder is about making decisions. And when we think about it, I'm thinking about it right now, thinking 11 p.m., most of us are either asleep or working on getting to sleep by about 11 o'clock. And sometimes we're still kind of working on things from the day. And so we've got all these decisions that we're in the process of clearing. Gallbladder time is a time when the activities of the day and the processing that we've done during the day now starts to kind of shift into a little bit more subconscious state. Working with right up and down in a nice line right along the midline. And they're going to be, I start usually here and then one below. And depending on how long a person is, either one below or one above. If they have a short waist, you just kind of squish it in. So if you're short-waisted, you'll just have them, it'll appear to be closer together than somebody like me who has a really long torso. I work with Dragonstone Jasper. Jaspers are a form of quartz. They're a very nurturing form of quartz, and the Dragonstone Jasper really draws up these beautiful reds and greens from the earth. So they are very, very nurturing and grounding at the same time. So I hope that answered that question. And there are all kinds of ways to explore working with gemstones and crystals to kind of to expand out a bit. Okay? Expand and learn and experience. I just got done talking about how we typically are going to sleep around 11 o'clock, or hopefully we are already asleep. And here's the question that says, what is a good stone to sleep with? So if we go back to intention, that's really going to drive the process. If you are familiar with the elemental system and want to work with that, you can start with which element will be helpful for me. If you are somebody who really likes to work with the chakras and you're really tuned in that, gee, my heart chakra needs some support, or I'm really working on my first and second chakras, then that may guide you as to which stones you want to work with. I think that stones that can help us calm and be gentle and settle down a bit can be really helpful to work with. When I go back to this piece of quartz, any stone you slip under your pillowcase, you could put in a little piece of quartz with it, and that will amplify up the healing properties, but it is not going to amplify your entire energy field so that you're awake all night. At least in my experience, I've never had that happen, and I've had some stones that are pretty kind of active sometimes that slip into my pillowcase. So I pulled 3 stones to address this question. One is Septarian. Septarian, I've done a rock talk. I know I've done a rock talk on Septarian, so you can learn more about that. But Septarian is a concretion stone that kind of gets into this mucky, prehistoric river and lake and ocean bed water and muck and really has solidified. So it's got a grounding component. It does have some fire in it, yet it also has the layers that sometimes during sleep we can process. So that's a nice one to work with. Sometimes what we need to do is calm down. We literally need to relax. We need to get our nervous system out of the fight, flight, freeze, which is known as the sympathetic nervous system, and get that into a state of rest and repair. Lepidolite is one of my favorite, hands down, go-to stones when working with anxiety and an unsettled nervous system. And so working with lepidolite, slipping that in your pillow can be really helpful. You know, and we all, of course, know that there are the days that we try to go to sleep and our mind is just churning, and we cannot seem to shut it off. I find blue lace agate. All agates are forms of quartz. This is a form of blue chalcedony, which is almost like a translucent quartz, and white quartz. It's got this beautiful banding, very, very supportive of the brow chakra, helping that brain to calm. And so that's another stone that works beautifully with the slipping into a pillowcase. And of course, any of them can be. You know, I mentioned that sometimes the ruby is what goes into into the pillowcase. And I always put them in the pillowcase so that I can find them. Otherwise, who knows where they go? They roll all over. Okay? Hope that helps. Now there is a question. Do we need to work with the stones at the time of day for the body clock? Great question. No, we do not need to. And I'm really grateful for that because, for example, the long layout, which is the start of the layout, is at 3 a.m. And I do not want to be up between 3 and 5 a.m. And also, we may be working, maybe we are working, we're in school, we're dealing with life. We don't have to stop. No, I would say if you can time it that way, that's great. But I don't worry about that as much as I think about, I'm off with my gallbladder. Okay, what's that about? Or I'm off with my large intestine. What is going on in that function area that's causing the glitch to occur? All right, so great follow-up question. Good. I have another question that came in. And this question is, what is red-capped amethyst? And that's really a great question. You know, sometimes you're going to find red-capped amethyst and it's going to be marketed as Super 7, and it is not Super 7. Super 7 is a specific kind of quartz that came from a specific mine that is no longer being produced, and it is not red-capped amethyst. So I think it's, again, important that we know our stones, know our rocks. And I will be doing a rock talk video on red-capped amethyst in the not too distant future, so you can watch for that. So red-capped amethyst, before I show it to you, I want to show you what it is. It is a combination of amethyst, which is a purple quartz. So it's one of the quartz family. We have clear quartz, citrine, rose quartz, smoky quartz, and amethyst. So it's a combination, a stone that together has amethyst. It has smoky quartz. Smoky quartz is sometimes pretty dark. Sometimes it's almost pale, yellow-brown. This one I like as a teaching tool. It is got a big crack here, kind of broken off. Nothing wrong with that, but this reminds me, this is why we don't put stones directly in water. And I've talked about that before in other crystal Q&As about working with water, gem waters. We just never go directly because we never know when there's a piece of a rock that's chipped off that's going to end up getting inside us. So it's amethyst, it's smoky quartz, and it's hematite or hematite. And we saw the hematite with the kidney layout, okay? Those three stones come together, and you get red-capped amethyst. And you can see that it's got this red cap. The termination point, the point, or they call termination, is kind of got a red hue. When you see the red, that's the iron, and that comes from the hematite, which is iron ore. And so this stone is a storm element stone, and it's really powerful for drawing earth energy all the way up to the heavens and spiritual energy all the way down through the energy field down into the lower part of the body. And so if you're working with a piece, it may be that you're holding it in your hand and maybe you decide you want to have the point towards you. Maybe you want to have the point away from you. Maybe you have it at the top of your head pointing down, maybe up, maybe it's at your feet and it's pointing up or it's pointing down. You go with what feels right, what you get a sense about. There is no right or wrong way. There are a couple other pieces I just wanted to show you. It comes in different sizes. It's typically going to have more of a dark kind of a burgundy and a purple. You're not going to, I've never seen it clear. It's going to be more milky. Okay. So that's the red-capped amethyst. It's really a wonderful stone. It is probably one of the most important stones we can work with. Ruby is another one because of, I think, those anchoring qualities. Okay. So I have one final question that kind of was referred to from previous Q&As. And then I'm going to circle back and talk a little bit more about my online school because I've been asked to talk about it. I have two pieces of shungite here that are shaped into little statues instead of spheres or pyramids or towers. And I feel like it was just in May in the last live Q&A that we talked a bit more about what happens when we have directional symmetrical shapes that are emitting out the properties of the shungite. And the question kind of came forth is, shungite shows up in other shapes. Do these same shapes offer the same kinds of effects? And I would say yes and not quite, because just like we can work with a piece of quartz, it's going to have properties. If we work with that quartz within the geometrical structure, it's going to have a little different effect. But I have two here. I have a shungite Buddha in prayer. And then I have a little frog. I love the frogs. Kids absolutely love the frogs. And I got to tell you, many adults, the kid inside the adult loves the frogs too. So these are examples where you can have shungite that's been carved into different shapes, and you can get them in a lot of different shapes. I tend to carry 2 or 3 different kinds. But I always can get more. If you are curious, we can have a conversation. But it's a way to bring the healing properties of shungite into an environment, into your room, and be a little whimsical about it or a little prayerful about it. Okay, so that was a good follow-up question. So one thing that people do ask is, say, can you take like 2 minutes and just tell us what your crystal classes are about? And I think that's fair. So in my online school, I have a Usui Reiki 1 course. I have an energy healing course. I have several free mini courses that you can, explore. And then I have several different crystal courses. Now, one of the courses is really a wonderful way to get introduced to crystal healing. You learn about the properties and the various types of crystals, how to work with them and how to work with them with the chakra system. And that's called Digging Deeper into Crystal Healing. Then I have a course called Crystal Grids 1, where you get a chance to explore not only some of these types of grids, but other types of grids as well that you can work with gemstones and crystals to support healing, either in your home, for yourself, even globally. I have another course called Advanced Crystal Healing, and that is designed for a person who's already perhaps taken 1 or both of the other courses and then really digs quite deep into a vast amount of advanced crystal healing work. And it's also for the person who's been working with crystals for a while and kind of has a gist of how to work with it and really wants to take a look at it more deeply. And there are advanced grids included in that course, and there is advanced work that involves meditations and advanced learning. I offer a crystal healer mentorship course, and that's for somebody who wants to work one-on-one with me over the course of several months, very intentionally moving through a process of being able to embrace crystal healing specifically for what their goals are. I finally offer a crystal healer certification program. That program actually consists of all 5 of those courses, and those are the first 3 courses: Digging Deeper into Crystal Healing, Crystal Grids 1. Actually, those are 2 courses. One of the energy healing courses is also a prerequisite before moving through the advanced coursework to be able to complete a crystal healer certification program. So that was really fast, but it gives you an idea of some of what those courses are about. And it may be that you're curious about that. Feel free to reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to talk with you and help you do some discerning as to what's kind of emerging for you, what you're interested in, and what seems realistic and doable. And they are all guided, self-paced, blended courses. So there are times definitely when we are meeting individually, either in person or remotely for the mentoring aspects, and then you work through the coursework at your own rate and pace. Okay. So this has been a really full conversation. We didn't get to all the questions, and that's okay. I will reach out to those who submitted those questions, answer them for those folks now, and I'll revisit those questions next month. So we've gotten a chance, you got a chance to see how I work with the rocks. You had a chance to learn about the organ body clock system and how we can support healing physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually through a system that's new to us and with the support of the gemstones and crystals. And we got a chance to learn about red-capped amethyst and talk a little bit about some of the fun ways that we can bring shungite into our environment for healing. So if you have questions, reach out to me, chat through my website, send me an email. I'm more than happy to answer your questions. I can tell you that next month we will be doing this live crystal Q&A, crystal conversations with me, Mary Jo, on Wednesday, August 16th from 6 to 7 p.m. The only way you can get the link to watch this live stream is through my website or through some of my social media or by reaching out to me. I do keep the live stream unlisted for this hour. And then after that, I will roll it out publicly and I'll make sure the chat does not show up when we make that public. Okay? So for now, I thank you for joining me. Look forward to hearing your questions next month. For now, I simply wish you many blessings. Be well.